be useful.
Hi.
Good morning.
Morning. So just wanted to tell you guys, first of all, I'm very grateful to be here with you today. But last night, my friend died.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, so sorry to hear that.
So there may not be the same energy in the meeting from this side today, but please go ahead. Continue.
Well, the other thing is, before we forget, best of luck for tomorrow, because it is tomorrow, isn't it?
It's Wednesday.
Oh, Wednesday. Okay.
I'm seeing Dave Miller tomorrow morning to go through.
Great.
He can help me cheat.
By the way, is he going to? Is it a virtual or in person to person? You doing?
It's virtual because the external is Klaus Atzenbach. So.
Oh right. Class is really nice. And Dave's going to sit in, is he?
I don't know.
You can ask, the protocol allows you to ask for someone to sit in. It's quite useful because the main thing is, if nothing else, so they can write down sort of any comments arising. Because my recollection is I've forgotten all that by the end of the meeting.
Yeah, that's.
Ask Dave tomorrow.
That's a fair point. Yeah, I'll talk to him about that tomorrow.
Will it be recorded or anything so we could watch it afterwards?
I don't know. I don't know. It's very simple. If they give me too many corrections to do, what they would call minor corrections, I simply probably can't do it. It's just not, to do the kind of academic thing they wanted. So I don't know. I don't really have feelings for that today. What happened yesterday is so much harder to process than I ever imagined, having gone through it several times. He was so close to my son as well. He taught him the final bit of riding a bicycle and how to pee outside like a man, all these little uncle things. And today has been challenging, to say the least. And then I got this in the mail. Celebration. And it's from 1978, including a ticket to an event. I didn't know. Other than historic value, it's just not that useful. I thought it would have pictures in it. Doesn't have much. Just arrived. Vint hasn't come back with much useful commentary, but this book, the section that I looked at yesterday before all of this happened to be on thinking outside the mind, like memory palaces and all that stuff. So that was a bit weird.
Could you hold the cover up again for a second?
Yeah, you have to get this. It's very, very good.
Yeah, I'm reading it at the moment. I'm about at the same chapter. In fact, I think I just finished that chapter last night.
I came to the conclusion yesterday, work-wise, that I decided, obviously, at least try to make a design for author and VR, because it's a very specific thing. And the shock of the kind of test that we did, one of them where you are in a room and there is a single line connecting something, it feels so awful, like a washing line or something. So the whole thing here on being able to put knowledge on the walls, to use the whole walls can be very interesting. So the glossary, very much.
I wonder, is there a 3D equivalent to Bezier curves?
There is a video I put in our Twitter feed of a demo of something that was a bit cheesy, but there was a part in there where they had. Hang on, if we go to Twitter. Hi, Brandel.
Morning. Morning, Brendel.
Yeah, there was, where is it? Yeah, the VR data analytics with Look VR. It's not exactly a Bezier curve, but it is showing something interesting. Oh, sorry, Brandel. I was just telling everyone that my friend who had been suffering with cancer for a while, who went in the hospital, starting his final treatment a month ago, died yesterday. So that's the mood here at the moment. But both you and Fabienne have been doing interesting things in Twitter. So also, if you want to report back from Friday, that would also be nice to hear.
So the World Wide Web Consortium face-to-face meeting on Immersive Web was pretty interesting. It's primarily about the web standards, and the committee is actually about the devices that are used in order to be able to make WebXR happen. And so there's a lot of haggling between different parties about what kind of level of access to have to the various devices that constitute sort of an augmented or virtual reality device. People who want to build their own version of things like ARKit and ARCore, which are what Google and Apple provide to produce that. And people who are more or less willfully ignoring the philosophical arguments for not providing the access to that level of granularity and information. The reality is that the web is not a safe place. And so giving all of the pages on the internet full access to your camera feed is something of a sensitive, it is something of a sort of an information disclosure issue, despite the fact that, it's a good way of being able to kind of add additional features into the system. And an alternative where the browser does things like figuring out how far the camera is from one moment to the next, and gives that information to the web page without telling people what they see on the table, is potentially a better thing to do. Anyway, so it was useful. One thing that was neat is that Dominic from W3C is thinking about a metaverse or an open worlds workshop similar to the one that you and I went to in 2016, Fabienne, about Immersive Web, hopefully happening sort of in the November timeframe this year, or possibly added to TPAC, but I think it's his sense that he'd like it to be a separate event. So yeah, interesting to think about where that's going to be and what sort of relevance it'll have. No, so it doesn't have a host. And I had heard people had suggested that the actual proper member of the actual proper Apple delegation had offered Apple, possibly Apple Japan. I'm not sure. And so yeah, we'll see where that goes. But I think it'll be pretty interesting to try to get to it for people who want to do social interaction and aren't just here for sort of Web3 and metaverse sort speculative dollars. Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, I was wondering, is there any local speech recognition that can be accessed from the web without having your audio feed going out to some megacorp servers?
I was actually talking to a guy in Siri and ML Health about that the other day. Siri is improving for that. So, for example, iPhones, if you do things like a timer and other simple queries, none of that leaves your device on more modern devices. But it's computationally actually pretty expensive and requires the use of a fairly large data model in order to do complicated processing. And so it's not something that people have spent a lot of time building and revising. But with Apple is sort of at least changing its sort of tightening its perspective on privacy and the liability that it sort of flows from it, as well as recognizing that, for example, health data is sensitive in a way that means that it really must be kept more locally, and so involving servers where you necessarily want to be doing some logging of how well a query does is at odds pretty fundamentally with having the ability to do queries that successfully report on the health data that you yourself own. So yeah, you're right now, Sarah can't tell you about things that your phone can tell you about because of the privilege disconnect there. And the only way to resolve that is to make more of that serial loop run locally.
Yeah, because ideally you'd want to have the speech processed locally, and you'd want the room video looped locally without it ever having to go out, because I certainly wouldn't want anyone to see the pile of stuff on my table.
Right. And yeah, and that's where if you've ever seen Ted Nelson's Computers for Cynics, and the point he makes there about the fact that an iPhone isn't technology, but a series of qualitative choices made by an organization for money reasons, also comes into play, where it's like you kind of need you need an organization whose vested interest is in providing that for the reasons that for whatever reasons it comes up with, and it's been pretty difficult to get to convince organizations to give us those things instead of kind of drip feed services, which you either pay by the month or pay by the query or some other kind of financial model. So it can happen, particularly once you get enough disaffected engineers to go and build an open source solution you can host locally. But yeah, it's a pretty roundabout way, which can have fairly different sort of performance characteristics to the sort of state of the commercial art.
Yeah, I'd rather pay more to have more powerful hardware locally and have the added privacy as a benefit.
Well, the issue with that is obviously also accuracy. So Dragon, naturally speaking, whatever thing. What's the name of that company again? It wasn't Dragon, it was...
Yeah, I think it was Dragon.
It was a
Yeah,
learner.
Yeah, the product has always been Dragon.
yeah. My programmer, Jacob, he was there before he went out and did these things. I mean, it is computationally expensive. I mean, we have Russians speaking Ukrainians living with us now, as you know, and we use Siri for translation, and it's absolutely freaking phenomenal. But then, the amount of statistical data they have to be able to do that, I don't think can feasibly work on device, except for, of course, as Brandl said, the basics that Siri does now. Set timer and that kind of basic stuff. When many years ago, the inventor of T9 texting, the predictive texting king, he called me and we had a chat, and he said, take any book off any bookshelf, open on any random page and read any sentence. So I did that. And he told me the name of the book. All he did was do a Google search, because most English sentences beyond a few words are actually unique. So the level of complexity for translation there must be absolutely astronomical if you don't have a large sample set of people who talk like that. So Vince has not tried the Quest yet, as far as I can tell from his emails, but he's got it and he's got the information. So our website /VR, Brandl's work is on there, Fabian's work is on there. So that's all good. As far as I'm concerned, that job is done. I will wait until later this week to get in touch with Isabel, who has been on holiday, and also the nuance. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so that's all that. And then I have my Viva on Wednesday, of course. And then I have to deal with these other things. Grief
Very
is
exciting to have your Viva.
What's that, Brandl?
It's very exciting to have your Viva. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you. It's
Yeah, we'll be thinking of you when you're going through it.
it's so arbitrary, because when you do something that isn't standard, which generally would be considered potentially completely useless or very useful, it's so arbitrary what kind of person approves it, right? I've always felt whenever I achieved anything in the past, that was basically that one other person got it. You know, it's not the merit itself as a society. How do we measure merit with these things? So, but I believe the people who are doing the exam on Wednesday are knowledgeable. So if they find issues, then I accept the issues. That was one thing I didn't realize about the academic process for a PhD. I can actually choose my examiners, not out of anybody, but there is a dialogue with my advisors to find someone we all deem would be suitably understanding the issue. So they wouldn't just look at the formatting of the reference, they would look at the work itself. They would have an understanding. That was good.
Well, there's an issue. You have a choice, but as some people find, you can either try and get someone who's terribly high profile as an attempt to further burnish your palmares as you go on, or you may find someone who isn't who's well tempered and isn't going to pick a fight, because that's occasionally where things get derailed, and it's often nothing really to do with the work, but just a mix of personalities.
Thank you. I have some questions regarding our future here. And a large part of it will definitely be random demos and dialogue. I think that's something very few groups can afford to do. But I also, just thinking about a few things on the why question, number one, we have a house full of Ukrainians. They're all wonderful people. So the only reason I'm mentioning it, it brings the war a little bit more literally to home to us. We all watch the news, but when you hear them talking to their family, and now they're finally striking back at Russia, that's one thing. And then the loss of a very close friend I've known since 15. On these things, these giant things, I mean, climate change is probably the bigger, but it's diffuse in terms of our emotions, right? When big shit like this happens, I just wonder, why can people not just pull together and be nice? Like in his case, he was such a kind person. When I got to know him in my teenage years, it took me about 5 years to trust him because I thought he was too nice. But yeah, he was originally from Bangladesh, grew up in London. He has 5 brothers, and there's all kinds of family bickering that I'm sure you all know about in different ways. At a certain point, when do we just decide what needs to be done in the world to get on with being nice? Know what I mean? And what is VR but an imagination amplifier, right? What can we do?
Yeah, well, that's the significant motivator of my work, is that I feel like while information is a superpower, sort of the manipulation of information through electrical means and electronic means is amazing. The reality is that the human mind is poorly suited to deal with the kinds of abstractions that it throws up, and even more poorly disposed to understand what psychic impacts, right? Exactly. What psychic impacts those abstractions sort of have on the framings that we are sort of obliged into, and so I feel like a lot of the sort of the connective technology of the early 20th century was kind of responsible for a lot of the atrocities of the early 20th century, insofar as it allowed the abstractions to scale further for people to create atrocities and inhumanities that were able to do a lot more. I mean, a lot of people who like thinking and talking about the war say that the most amazing thing about the German Panzer tank was the radio, and it was sort of inferior in almost every other way, save for the coordination, but that was more than enough. But I just think that an entire society that's sort of coordinated based on radio and based on the kinds of things that people have had the ability to sort of really deploy en masse starting in the early 20th are things that we kind of still haven't grappled with at a human level. And so what's essential is to think really, like you bring up Annie Murphy Paul's book, Rhoda, is to think about what it is that we as people respond to and what that means we should kind of continue to reconstitute and recenter within the context of numbers of horrifying things like mass death or climate changes. Is what are parameters, what are ways in which we can actually grasp both the numbers, which are meaningful. When you hear 40,000 people have died of such and such, then it is actually very important to be able to distinguish between 40,000 and 35,000. But it's also very important to realize that those are people and human lives. And I think it would be one of my main goals with processing, information processing, is first to have the apparatus cognitively to be able to do both at once. Because an Excel spreadsheet is very good at numeric quantity, but poor at the other. What can we do to can both hold those quantitative measures and understand what you can glean from those things by having that numerical proficiency while not losing sight of the humanity that underpins it all.
Randall, I know you've studied proper neuroscience. I've been reading over the years as well, and trying to understand what are the hands inside the brain that catch things. I don't want to use the normal language because that's too constrained, but there was something really odd. I don't know if you were here when I mentioned it on the call, but anyway, so Edgar did a thing and he did it well. So of course, as parents, we feel a certain kind of happiness seeing our child do something well. But the odd thing was to see him self-initiate and then complete something well was completely different feeling that I didn't know existed before that happened. So in the kind of talk you're talking about, and in terms of really getting to grips with why people are doing good and bad things, we got to find out. I mean, like our community, we've got to find out more about what the hooks are in our brains. Because when you look at political discussions, like someone who supports Trump, for instance, to take a caricature, you can't reason with them because it's all based on identity and how they see the world. But, are there ways where their worldview can be kind of made explicit so that they can be discussed in a different way? Because what do we all want? We want safety, love. We want the basic same stuff. And at this point, where we have an actual war in Europe, I mean, it's insane, right? We have to get off some high horses and look at some specific mechanisms. I don't know. So Brandel, the VR page that I put together, it's kind of relevant to what you said. Let me just 1 second here. Sorry, a bit slow, extra slow. If you go to the Future Text Lab, whatever, blah, blah, /VR, the thing is, my feeling is, and I really wonder what you guys think, that we approach this work in general from two directions. So the first thing on there is the library with a large card and taxonomy mural. That's something that I made, very, very basic. And it was just to give Vint a super simple introduction to the idea of stuff on walls. And then mural, both your kinds of murals are here now, Randall. Now suddenly it's walls with crazy interactions. Constellation is complicated in itself. But anyway, then there is the exploratory room that Fabian made. And I mentioned elsewhere the thing you made, Brandel, where it's almost like a magic carpet of dialogue from the group. So, ways to move between these will have to become interesting, right? I mean, I have a really basic one for author where you're sitting there working You come across some kind of a concept you want to, literally snap your fingers, and now you're in concept room. So all the walls is used with lots of concepts where you're thinking, manipulate them, see the relationship. So that's all it is about. Snap your fingers again, and you're back to where you were. The kind of thing that you did there, and Fabian did with the, being able to put things on a grid or not. We have to look at how crazy they can be, and also how you can go between them, right?
Yeah, well, that's one of those things that isn't provided by the systems very well right now. There's a discussion of WebXR navigation API, which would be the right way to do this, but nobody has. We don't have a clear line of sight as to what are the important components of it. Some of the folks at Meta have, I think, a decent idea of what needs to be done there, but the issue is that WebXR is done so work has the opportunity to be done so differently by so many different sort of engines and systems that the place going from and the place going to likely have so little to do with each other that it's hard to come up with a stable sort of system for the interstitial between them. But that's not to say we won't work it out. It's just that it's in a tricky spot at the moment. But yes, it would be nice. We could do something on our own side with it, but it's flaky because that hasn't been worked out. Unfortunately, WebXR is still in its really in its infancy with regard to standards and support. And so if we were to come up with something that we liked, then we might be able to propose or suggest it as a polyfill. But yeah.
Fabian, you had
it would.
What was that document format you said was like kind of the PDF or VR?
GLTF?
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, I think Fabian has got himself finally a webcam light. I can properly see you now.
Again, turn it off and turn it on. Turn it off.
Yeah. A huge difference. That's good.
I even have the proper influencer kit.
Yeah. I thought it was to go behind you like a little halo.
It's odd when we talk about kind of human communication. Nothing that I can see puts it in more clear relief than what I went through yesterday when I went to see my friend in the hospital with my son. And he was sitting up, and we managed the hugs. We thought he would last at least another week, and I got to hold him and touch him. I got to tell him obviously that I love him. That matters. But if he'd lasted another day or a day less, no real difference. And now it's all over. So when you look at human communication, it really is almost the opposite of what we work on. It's literally sitting next to someone or touching them. It's like us in this room. I mean, I haven't even seen Peter's face move, right? But we all have a strong human connection, but it's still very different from that. So I think, I don't know, I'm not saying VR can make that happen. I'm not saying that at all, but we can't just keep spinning the same boxes. It's a shame Adam is not here because he was very much against the event demo time. He wanted to talk about the what and the why, the why. And that is, of course, a little bit of what we're doing now. So anyway, I think we're all aligned. Fabian, I saw you shared your page of principles and beliefs, which is fantastic. Is there anything you'd like to highlight there? I would love to hear.
Oh, that I don't. That's the kind of thing, honestly, that I don't update it often enough, unfortunately, and I wish, because what I think is interesting. So I'll touch it a bit. There is the concept of worldview. I don't know if people are familiar with it. It's not just a word, it's a concept developed like 30 or 40 plus years ago by a professor who was then at the VUB in Brussels, here in Belgium, where yeah, you articulate not just how you see the world, but what makes you see the world a certain way. And let's say one of the most obvious one being religion. How does, let's say, your set of value make you see the world and interact back? That also links back to the question a bit earlier of why do better tools in the end? Can it help or alleviate some situation from war and lack of understanding between cultures or values, or or global warming, or our ability to not manage our environment? So all this, but then it's been, let's say, updated by a philosopher in the same research group 30 years later, more or less, called Clément Vidal. And he was basically saying that, okay, if you can express your worldview and explicit it, you can of course do it as text. You just write your philosophy, your worldview, how you see the world. But if you can do that and you can agree on terms with somebody else, then you can compare your worldview. Like, do I have the same religion as somebody else? Do I have the same perspective, I don't know, on death penalty, etc., and then see where there are differences, and eventually be realistic in terms of trying to solve a problem. If you don't have the same worldview, maybe you talk about the same problem, but you don't see it at all the same way. And the idea was then, if you can make your worldview explicit with a certain, let's say, ontology, then you can compare, and you can compare yourself over time, or at least your worldview over time, and see how somebody else with similar worldview also evolved over time. So I think it's quite interesting. It's a worthwhile process. I discussed with him, but 5 or 10 years ago. I don't know, maybe even further. I don't remember, but I would have to check the wiki. And one thing that could also be interesting is, in terms of worldview and philosophy, there is a website called fieldpapers.org that's managed by the most famous Australian philosopher at the moment, who wrote a book on VR like a month or two ago.
Are you sure that's not a contradiction in terms? Famous Australian philosopher.
Chalmers, David Chalmers.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, right. Yes, indeed.
See. So Chalmers manages fieldpapers.org, and what's interesting is, because he started to collect papers, or at least the references in philosophy, he also started to have an audience of philosophers, and then he asked them, he polled them from time to time. So, for example, I don't know, what is the most or most current philosophers, materialists or not? And then you can see also that trend evolve over time. And then if you articulate these kind of things, are you a materialist or not, then you start to get a worldview. So you could, but it's not done as far as I know, compare your worldview to the current trends in philosophy at the moment, for example. So yeah, I think why do I mention all this is because I think most of us do get excited when we see a new book that is going to challenge our worldview. Like, that is like, oh shit, my whole perception of the world was incorrect. And then some kind of eureka moment, because then it's like all the things that somehow didn't add up so far maybe could. So I think my own, let's say, shame in not updating the page is, despite all the books and the prototype and all that, that hopefully make me see the world, for example, more realistically, so that I can have more impact on it, or not yet reflected on that page. But yeah, I think it's quite interesting, worthwhile at least process.
That's a really cool thing to play with. I got really stuck on the fact that I cannot stand Chalmers. I find him absolutely vacuous, and I haven't found many people agree with me. So I'm maybe just missing something about his point, but I just think that he has nothing to say. And it's probably my fault.
Well, you can at least find the field papers and the survey interesting, because it has just let's say through
Oh yeah.
his organization or work, but not necessarily what he has to say, at least for that.
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. No, I mean the hard problem of consciousness and its framing of virtual reality. Just like I don't understand the relevance of his, like I understand the relevance of bringing up a book. I don't understand the relevance of his arguments within it because they don't seem to do anything to the field. I'll take a look at field papers.
No, so I posted the link in the chat. So Phil,
Yeah,
like Phil
sorry.
of
I'm with you now. Sorry, back on the right page.
And also for the Brendel on Chalmers specifically, I'm now like a third of the way or a quarter of the way through his recent book on VR, and I have nothing special to report on it. It had nice illustrations, and he goes through different topics in terms of realism and whatnot, and it's interesting, but I will probably not change my worldview page after reading the book. I find, for example, Donald D. Hoffman much more interesting. But yeah, again, I'm just like a third or a quarter of the way through, so it's not fair to comment yet.
Well, thank you for doing that work. I look forward to how you feel about it through the end of it. Yeah, just Lex. I listened to his chat with Lex Friedman and was intrigued as to what he's doing, but also curious as to how he's being responded to. Yeah, reality plus, right? Yeah,
Indeed, yeah.
So here's a question then. What can we as a community do to foster more weird thinking? I know that the journal isn't much, and Mark and I need to work on the next issue, but I do hope that we can do stuff and find stuff that at some point we get to the point where other people, even remotely thinking about this, can use this as a bit of a reference. I guess it's just continuing loose discussions, right?
Yeah. I mean, having an aggregation and commentary, and I mean, being able to locate prototypes next to each other, and I don't just mean in a page with links, but conceptually, like understanding the conceptual relationships between them is a valuable thing, because a lot of people just do stuff, but they don't know where it goes. They don't know where it fits. Sort of reminds me of Nielsen's talk about the Unseen College and how it was the Invisible College, and how it was that's Unseen University from this school. How it was kind of created in part by an editor who kind of goaded individual intellectual contributors into sharing as a matter of notoriety. So a lot of people make a lot of prototypes right now, and they aren't necessarily doing the work of figuring out what they're like and what they're related to. And so when you sort of when you stumble across a trove of things that somebody has done and thought about, then it's up to you to see which of the pieces are relevant and which of the pieces, sort of borrow from other things, because people will just do the thing rather than saying like, well, this is kind of like a paper presented at WISC such and such or Chi such and such, and I think that one of the problems for me is that actual human-computer interaction university research is really specific and small and limited in terms of what people want to do with it. But at the same time, a lot of the people who are outside of academy contributing don't have any discipline at all about where things fit or whether they're holding it up to real problems and things like that. I don't know. I feel like VR itself is something that suffered from that and is now suffering from it less as it becomes a kind of an industry, and it's easier to see who are constructive and contributing kind of participants in it. But it's still a pretty dark art to actually find the interesting and innovative things that are happening in public view.
Yeah, I mean, I strongly disagree. I got a degree in human-computer interaction, believe it or not. And it was combined with ergonomics because there was no such thing as human-computer interaction as a discipline. And it was incredibly disappointing, the course, even though it was a prime institution and all of that, because partly it was about testing, user testing, because that's something that can be measured and therefore be put in a test for the student to know if they know how to test. And the other thing was a profound lack of looking back properly. So there was, whoever wrote the books, like Dix was one, I remember a few last names, but a lot of it just, they didn't know the situations firsthand. So, having been lucky enough to have been working with Doug, I'd have to take my hand up in class every once in a while and say, no, that is not what happened. And the teacher would say, oh, well, that's what I got from the book, right? So HCI now has got more subtitles, as in titles of different subfields, I mean. So it's been professionalized. I actually had a meeting via Valentina, my wonderful PR friend. She introduced me to a UX person to redesign the augmented text company's website. The amount of acronyms and words this young child, I'm saying that only because of the evolution of the field rather than that person's age and my age, was astounding. She managed to say so many things that didn't mean anything, everything from, the need for a wireframe, all these fancy words that professions need, rather than, okay, let's look at the layout, see what works. It was so, I have to protect my my professional image. I couldn't take the person seriously. So I think that's reflecting a little bit on what you said, Randall, but also how things connect. Yes. That's another thing with invention and innovation that's really difficult. I wouldn't mind, when I get my head together, for example, to sit and map out an entire infrastructure for this, but that's me. How do we do that collaboratively? How do we define what a background is, what data is, what objects are? How do we define these things in a community where we build a mental consensus of where different innovations kind of fit? Because right now they are all cartoons, aren't they? Or, the demos. They don't exist in a world. And that really cool demo we talked about in the beginning, the one I put on Twitter that you saw, that company has now disappeared. It's owned by Google. Brandel, can you restart your video? You're frozen quite often. Do you mind?
I'm frozen. Interesting.
You were a few times. Now you're back a bit low frame rate.
Or you just weren't moving very much.
And now you're holding your head. Frozen, holding head. But yeah, what does everyone else think about that? I think Brandel brought up some really, really important points there that are worth going through. Mark is pointing in a direction that's
no, sorry. I was going to say I thought I was being sorry. I shouldn't be using the buttons. Yeah, I actually something Brandon said did strike me. This thing about thinking too narrowly. I'm reflecting on this at the moment. I'm just busy pushing my paper in for Hypertext this year, and reflecting on the sort of 4 or 5 years of its genesis. And the most consistent thing has been one of two things: why bother? And isn't it just, both of which are wrong? Well, but the second is always wrong. And what the second one boils down to is it narrow enough that I can turn it into a reproducible piece about which we can argue till the cows come home, whilst at the same time ignoring all the wider issues that are being brought up. So I very much sort of feel this. I mean, that this is a problem with some areas of study, for all sorts of reasons, are not well suited to taking on certain sorts of thinking or work, simply because their method of practice makes them think or work too narrowly. And that's no reflection on their intellect or their interest or any of those other things. It's just that the framing they use doesn't actually help looking at a wider problem, because, you know, effectively it doesn't give space for the wackier idea, or the ability to just, instead of saying, you know, why, is to say why not. Sorry, the dogs are outside my place, and something else I can't do anything about.
Yeah, I mean, just simply, you know, I know that there is a lot of pushback from a lot of you in the way that I write with like hyperbole and stuff, and that's totally fine. We are supposed to honestly do that with each other in different ways. But I do think that a key mission here has to be just quite simply to, I know there's some disagreement with, you know, we should just do it ourselves, but just really at some point, it doesn't have to be every journal, doesn't have to be every meeting, but maybe it is at the end of the year, future of text, really wake up a key bunch of people to half the potential and half the issues, such as the crazy issue that you can't take everything into every room. And, you know, that kind of stuff. There are some not thought through issues, and how, you know, last week it really shocked me that just having one single line in the room connecting two graphs was really annoying. You know, because before I expected that to be like Noda. Noda has its own issues, of course, but, you know, the kind of potential and issues, they got to go out there, don't you think?
The line was annoying. How is it? Because it was too visible or too big? I mean, I just sort of trying to understand the nature of the.
Oh, did you try that room with the Oculus?
Obviously not that one, because I didn't see the line. So
well, the way that it felt to me was like being in a room with a cloth drying wire going through it.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you can move your head through it didn't really matter. It was visually incredibly obstructive. It was a very thin line. And I'm sure we would be able to figure out how to do it. Maybe they only appear when you touch something, or all kinds of things. But it was one of those, damn, here is a massive assumption I had about what we could do in VR, and it just feels not nice.
But I kind of test. I mean, I certainly, and since you mentioned some Noda stuff, one of the things that I found unexpected about that is actually ended up fiddling with the line effectively styling quite a lot, because most of the time it was effectively wrong in a way that I find hard to describe. But it wasn't just aesthetics. It's somehow, often they were too strong. I mean, I think doing lots of work with spatial hypertext, you know, essentially I'd really rather have no lines, because lines, unless the lines are genuinely meant to make a very deliberate foregrounding of certain connections, I find all they do is get in the way. They because they make some things seem more important than another, which is why, I mean, one of the reasons I played with that app was I've always enjoyed using sort of spatial hypertext tools and that kind of thing, but always doing it in 2D, and it would be nice to do it in a more open space. But I'm realizing half of the problem is I don't really know what I want from that space, except more room than I've had in a 2D environment.
That was kind of like the breakthrough I had this weekend, and that is having knowledge graph things. Yes, number one, as you already know from my implementation in Maps and Author, having the lines all the time is just annoying. But also secondly, just being able to snap into a room and you have all the walls, because there's this proprioception thing talked about here, such a great reminder, that when you move your chair, you know where things are, you know, all of that stuff. If that's all it is, almost a circular room with your own concepts, and then you can touch them and it reveals books or connections or whatever, fantastic. Not everything in VR has to be 3D. You know, because Vint was a bit derogatory talking about, oh, VR is just like having a big monitor. Well, actually, it is. But the monitor, you can change shape anytime you want. Doesn't cost anything extra. There can be many of them, etc. So in addition to the weird floaty canvassy thing that Brendel did for dialogue stuff, yes, let's do it. Yes, or Fabian, please.
Yeah, also just the quick demo I shared earlier today on having AR in VR is to show that it's not just a big monitor. Because what there is between you and that big monitor can also take shape, can also be based on your interaction, whatever is useful to you at the moment. So I feel really the idea of being a big monitor is just incorrect, simply incorrect.
Oh, I completely agree with you, but just like, there we go. A lot of people say Hamilton is just a rap musical. You know, shouldn't shy away from saying, yeah, it is. And just saying that, but that is not a bad thing. That VR is not just monitors, of course not. But even the basics, if someone thinks it's just that, to start building from that is really, really incredibly powerful, just that single step. So I agree with you. I'm just wondering how to communicate it, further, because you're absolutely right. It isn't that. But to say it is just that, it's like, okay, if you think it is just that, it's still amazing. There's a lot of head shaking there. I know. Okay, Mark.
No, I wasn't. I certainly wasn't shaking my head. I was just sort of listening and thinking on it. But I mean, because I can thinking the thing about rooms and monitors is I can see a purpose for some of that. But again, I find myself much more interesting is just being able to have information in a sort of plastic space, and it's less about having more or fewer dimensions to play with. It's the fact that I'm not trying to do it within a, you know, the size of my physical tabletop or the size of this physical screen that I'm looking at. So, you know, in a sense, the extra dimension, I'm not sure is necessarily a strong thing. The thing that I keep taking away from sort of going into a virtual environment is more this sense of being able to have a less banded environment. In fact, you know, I don't necessarily want walls or texture or something, because a lot of it's just visual noise. If it's not adding something, it's actually taking away from the thing that I'm looking at. Now, that's not what you need for everything. If I'm, you know, go back to, for instance, the room you built for the Linnaean thing, there's an obvious point in having the walls and the visual artifacts. So there's no one size fits all here. But thinking in this, you know, if you're saying, well, think more widely. I mean, one area of doing work or doing exploratory things, idea and sense making in virtual environments, I find the sort of the walls in the loosest sense the least important thing, and the thing I find I'm missing the most is what the sort of that's stopping me using the 6 degrees of freedom with the information on which I want to work.
Yeah, for me, it's the disparity between, so I have a 4K monitor. It's pretty good. And it has probably at least 60 hertz refresh rate within Mac OS. Now that's just here. And then here, just outside of it, I have 0 hertz. It can't update at any time a second. I could maybe go and print something out in the other room and then tack it up. But that doesn't scale very well in comparison to the experience that I have here. Likewise, I can type with my hands on the keyboard, and I can move a single point in continuous 2-dimensional space. And we can use modifications on the keyboard to augment that 2-dimensional space to be able to kind of work falteringly within 3-dimensional space in order to be able to build stuff in Blender. And but I thought we were going to do Blender today, but we still have, you can if you want, but yeah. But those are onerous and difficult, and that the reason is not because it's intrinsically conceptually difficult for me, it's because of the interface. And the same thing with being able to pan a view around in a large document or zoom in and out of it. We don't have the ability to see all of those things in that way. If you go to 50 years ago and say, we're going to have an incredible superpower that we can view through this tiny mailbox slot, then he would probably say, let's have a bigger one, please, because I need to use the entire room that I'm in to be able to manipulate this information. We have these blinkers on because of the incredible superpowers we have within this tiny little box. But the reality is that if you weren't along for the ride, you'd think that it was too much of a price to pay. And why can't we sort of work in a larger environment? Computing's been harder, but it could be a lot easier.
Absolutely, Fabian, please comment. But yeah, I would be happy if you wanted to do a tutorial, Brandel, in a few minutes, if that suits everyone else. Okay, yeah, Fabian, please.
Just to address a bit more broadly the wicked ideas, and I personally have a backlog of, I'm rather convinced, good ideas for interesting prototypes, thanks to this group, thanks to discussions, thanks to presentation, thanks to pushback on past demos. So to me, that's okay. Like and it's manageable. Like I don't necessarily have at every single meeting, I don't have the feeling like, wow, this is the best idea ever. I must dive through it and drop everything at all every single time, because that would also be problematic to me if it was too wicked every time or too crazy every time. So I think to me that's a good balance, in the sense that yeah, there are plenty of quality discussion that lead me to ideas, and some of it are like visually, I believe, interesting, and others are not. For example, the GLTF or the USD extension as a format to be more interoperable potentially. That's not sexy, let's say, in terms of visual, but I think in terms of expressibility or power to go through, especially for taking knowledge work seriously in VR, I do think it has great potential. So yeah, I'm not really worried in terms of getting new ideas. Just things take a bit of time. So yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not, and I don't think it's a good idea also to push to show more things all the time, because then it's just the leg room there is to go crazier is not there anymore. It's just like quote unquote production. So yeah, I'm rather happy with let's say how fertile in terms of ideas and things done here are.
Yeah, look, I would absolutely think it would be amazing if we split our meetings, as we've tried many times, but how about we split it so Mondays is infrastructure from the sense of what you were talking about, and Fridays are demos, ideas, exploration. So how we connect on Monday, what should be connected on Fridays? What do you guys think? Or something similar, I don't know.
Could be one thing. I also, if we were to split, I think one thing that could help the group to vent a bit, and that's me talking naively again, since I was not there 6 months ago, but is let's say maybe on one day it is VR and another day it goes broader than VR, because that also helps in terms of interoperability, because as everybody mentioned here, yeah, you need to be able to bring that exciting content in order to make those links or to move them around or to extract it out of. So I think that all could also be aware where, let's say, the demo, the things that are shown on one day must be VR, but the other they don't have to. Because, for example, I had some things on on computational notebooks that I think could be interesting, but it's not specific, or even the GLTF format should be usable in VR, but it's not like pure VR. So that could also be a split that allow people that don't care about VR to still potentially be excited and thus give comment on VR when they are there still. So that's another potential split.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. It doesn't have to be all VR all the time, absolutely. And also, at some point, when I get a bit more serious about author and reader in VR, I would really like your feedback. And that could be a project we could have at a specific time too. Just whoever could make it to that, because it is very specific. And if someone has something else very specific, we can do battle, see what makes sense, not just one thing. Mark?
It's really just a thought prompted by what Fabian was just saying. And in terms of broader things, one aspect is to sort of shell out slightly back towards what brought us in here, which is text. Because in the sense that that's one area that I think a lot of other people just won't take a look at. They'll be looking for the low-hanging fruit in terms of visual things. And yeah, I think I think there's just some more interesting discussion to be had in that. I think helpful to, well, I think is Fabian quite eloquently put it, to then seed some ideas to then take back into the more applied aspects of the VR context in which we're looking at things at the moment.
Cool. Yeah, agree. Good. Brandel, are you ready to blend?
Yeah. No, I was reminded recently, there was a fellow, I actually don't know them, on Twitter, who said some very kind words about some of the stuff that I did a number of years ago. What was it? Kifa, saying that some of my experiments from 5+ years ago are very adjacent to some of the interesting ideas that he's been playing with recently, and is a tools for thought person, but not actually a VR person. And so yeah, there's lots of stuff to do. I mean, a lot of it leads into it for me is sort of gestural mechanisms for the manipulation of information. But yeah, okay, I will share my screen, and I will share just Blender. I figured we could start. So this is something that I was just doodling while we were talking today. Everybody see this okay?
Yep.
Cool.
The table.
Yep, it's a table. It's got a weird sort of turtle head thing. Come and fix that corner. But yeah, so this is just an opportunity to talk about how Blender works a little bit, and how to use it. The first thing that I like to do, just because I'm from Apple, is make an iPhone. It's a pretty useful exploration of things. So this is the default interface. When people open it up, it should look like this. And one of the most useful things to do, is particularly in virtual reality, but elsewhere as well, is to know how big stuff actually is. So this is a cube. You can middle drag, or you can, I can't remember but if you can commit to using a mouse, then it's best. But yeah, you can. Oh yeah, that's right. You can click on this and move around, which is pretty useful. And same with this. Instead of scroll wheel, you can dolly in. This is not a zoom. This is a dolly or a track, but whatever. And instead of a middle drag, instead of a shift middle drag, which I use reflexively, you can click on this hand. So all of these things down the side are ways of sort of overcoming the lack of 3-button mouse, but it's sort of imperfect and incomplete. Another very useful thing to do is hold down the tilde key on the top left corner of your screen, of your keyboard, and have the access to these canonical views, top, right, left,
Sorry,
bottom.
The tilde key?
Yes, that's right. Tilde key.
On the
And if you
British
hold down
keyboard,
tilde-
it's lower left. It's not top left, by the way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's just above the control. Literally, the control caret points to it. So it's funny.
Oh, neat. So yeah, they're view selected. This is exceptionally useful if you have a large number of things in a scene. So if you have a bunch of things like this, and you want to click on this thing here, and you press tilde, and go to view selected. That's in replacement for a period on the numpad, but many people are moving away from having numpads. So, but it's very, very useful because you can be in a bunch of different scenes, or you can have a bunch of different objects. I'll delete all of the other ones here. Hold down Shift to do that. Press X. So we're going to make this into a phone just as a starting point. But it's a useful kind of workflow for other things as well. So this there are all sorts of hidden pieces in Blender, hidden pieces of user interface. But this one here is called the View and the Tool menu. And when you select an object, or you can also hit N to toggle that. When you click on an object, then you get more stuff in it. And in item, you can see here, not only is this a cube, but this is actually 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. In practice, if you're just modeling things for being in 3D, it doesn't matter too much, but it is very useful to have real world scale. So if you wanted to have a person, one of the things that's pretty useful is to know rough dimensions of a person. Also, Blender is Z up, so that it's red, green, blue is X, Y, Z. So this red axis is the X axis, the green axis is the Y axis, and the blue axis is the Z axis, or Z axis. And unfortunately, yeah, like different applications have different axes. So 3JS, for example, is Y up, whereas 3JS, whereas Blender is Z up, just because the people, because it's technically correct according to math, the mathematics to have Z up, but only Blender has been so pedantic as to insist on that because other people sort of see Y as up.
You
but
save it as Y up? Can you
Sorry?
save the file as Y up for other tools, or do the other tools know which axis was up in
Yes.
Blender when they read one of the files?
Yes, it's imperfect, but anytime people notice that there's been a conversion issue, then they tend to be paved over pretty quickly. So if you export as a GLTF, then it's possible to export as Z up, as Y up without too much problem. So one of the first things to do to build something, if you want to create, say, an iPhone, is to get the iPhone dimensions. And you can type these in real world units. So this here is 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. An iPhone is 7.7 centimeters. So it's very narrow there because it's still 2 meters on those. And then in Y, it's 7.2, no, it's 7.9 like millimeters deep. And then somewhere around like 14.6 centimeters. And so now you see it's very, very small, but you can do that trick again of either period on the numpad, not on the normal keyboard, but on the numpad, or tilde key and view selected, and you can zoom in. And this is an iPhone. Actually, that looks a little. Maybe this is a new iPhone and they're a bit thinner. Anyway, so this is actually pretty useful because it's already does a pretty good job of being an iPhone. If you wanted to make another thing to be a person, then you can go to add up here or Shift A and add a new box, and you can make a person here. So if you wanted a person to be, say, you can also move these things according to the sort of the widgets and things like that to move them around. But it's still useful to see these numbers. So if you want to say that a person is about 5'10", then you can go 5'10", and that's 1.78 meters. They're still probably too wide if they're 2 meters by 2 meters. You can scale these in with these things here. So I actually don't know how wide people are. I tend to pull in reference imagery to be able to do that. but that looks okay as a person. And you can use these move, rotate, and scale buttons to be able to get widgets, these graphical elements for moving these things up and around. But I prefer to use the keyboard shortcuts. So G is for grab, and R is for rotate, and S is for scale. But yeah, for the time being, for these, then you can move them like this. Another useful thing to see is that you're updating values here. So if we know that this is supposed to be, we want to, right now everything is centered so that the phone that we have is right here in the middle of it. But if we wanted to put it in this person's hand, then we could start trying to put things on the ground. So we could move this up by, say, moving its Z. If we vary this, you can see that it's moving it up. So now that it's 1.78 meters tall, we could put it up by 1.78 meters divided by 2, and it'll be on the ground there.
Amazing, these little conversions and basic maths you can do in the text and input dialogues.
Yes, it's essential for being able to work these things out. It's also really useful that you can work in all of these different units. So you see that I used metric and I used imperial. I don't know that it has chains and furlongs, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did, just because of the kinds of people who make Blender. But now you can see also we don't have we could name these things. There's an outliner here. We could name this one person, double clicking on it. And then that means that this one here is phone. Or we can also change the views that we have. So instead of these objects being solid, we can go to wireframe, and that's accessible up here. These are the 4 different view modes. There's wireframe, there's basic shading, there's good shading with basic lighting, and good lighting. So if you click on this one for wireframe, then you can see the phone down here, and you can see through all of these things.
Does it have a concept of weight for physics simulations?
Of which? Sorry?
Of weight. Does it have a concept of weight and density?
Yes, if you wish, there is a whole component of it related to simulations and constraints. So there's down this area here, you see there's there's a number of tabs, modifiers. The blue wrench is modifiers. The blue bunch of dots is particles. This one here is physics, and so you can use it for physics simulations of, for example, inflating a pillow, or a puffer jacket if you desire. I haven't played too much with those things because the majority of my interest is in box modeling for the purposes of creating objects to look at and manipulate in virtual reality. But certainly people have done a good number of things with it. You can simulate hair, you can simulate objects, you can simulate explosions and deformations. It's really as Fabian has said in the past, it's a full sort of discipline. The entire, you can spend your life in Blender, and you can spend many careers in Blender, because while it doesn't have the same history of being the sort of tool of choice for production 3D, it's quickly becoming practical for people to use it in preference to Maya or Cinema 4D or any of those other applications that people make, movies like Lord of the Rings or Avatar and things like that in. Yeah, so I've got this phone. So you can also see when I have these selected that there are the lines along the cardinal axes. So you can see that the red is directly on X, and you can see that it's only manipulating X. I can go Command Z or Control Z to undo that. And Z. Sorry, I actually did grow up saying Z, but it's being in America for 8 years has made it difficult because people will literally not understand you. They're like, what are you even saying?
That wasn't the problem. The problem was you said command, you corrected yourself to control, but no, it is command.
Good. It's both.
Not right now. You're on a Mac.
I'm on a Mac. I'm typically using a Windows keyboard on a Mac, but I happen to have picked
okay.
up a proper Mac. But it is both Control and Command Z for the benefit of not messing up people's muscle memory. But so we have the cardinal axes, just the red, just the blue, and just the green. But there's also these squares, and they are. You can see that the green one is kind of orthogonal to the blue arrow. The green square is orthogonal to the green arrow. So what that means is because manipulation in 3D is ambiguous, but if you pick an axis to be orthogonal to, then you are returned to a system context in which you have an unambiguous coordinate space. So if I click on the green box, then now I'm moving it in that plane, in what's called the Y plane, or actually the XZ plane. So now I'm moving it, and I can be confident that what's happening is that it remains 0 in Y, and I'm just moving it up to the left of the figure here. And we can also go back to here and see if and where it intersects, and that we're correct. Because one of the devilish things about 3D modeling is that it's exceptionally easy to become lost. And if I'm moving this and I'm just moving it in free space, I actually don't know where this is now. As it happens, one can become accustomed to it and know that if you move in this kind of free movement, then the default movement is the plane that is parallel to the camera. There's the plane that we're looking at, and whatever, but that's still not a tremendously helpful plane to be navigating in for the most part. So picking your planes or moving in a single dimension. So a lot of people actually do 3D simply using one plane, one axis at a time. So they'll actually do all of their movement like this. I find that to be overkill. And if you pick these, or if you look at your stuff through a cardinal viewport, like here, then it becomes unambiguous. You don't need to worry about any of those things because you know that you're not altering its value in Y here. But yeah, so now we've got a person and we've got a phone. We can make them look a little bit better and more like phones and people. And so one way of doing that, I'll just zoom into this guy, is put a proper material on it. So to do that, there's all of these things down here. Everything, actually, if you hover on anything, then you'll tend to see a reasonable description of it. And even better, if you press F1 on those things, then you'll get a help menu on them as well. But the place where you apply materials is in this thing, material properties. At some point, it's kind of one of those floating signifiers. At some point, it looked like a ball, like a 3D rendered ball that had a checkerboard material on it. And it's since lost its kind of significance. It's kind of like the beach ball on Mac OS originated as an optical disc in Next, but we've forgotten what it was.
Oh, the Amiga Beach Ball, right?
The Amiga Ball. I can't remember what the Amiga Ball looked like, but for waiting. It could be a callback to that as well. I'm told my connection is unstable, so you may be losing me. But yeah, so now
just
these
an
two
early
things are
glass sphere from Infinity, actually. That's the closest. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, could be.
So now we can change this material. We can make a new material. Oh, wait, no. So I'm going to make a new material here. I keep pressing Options Z, which is turning the system to being X-ray, where you can see the backside of all of these faces. But there are a number of sort of keystrokes that can get you into not terrible trouble, but once you know what they are, then you can back out of them. But here, so we can add it. We can make this material. We can make it black, and we don't see it here, and that's because we're in. Remember, there's wireframe, basic, good materials, and good lighting. We go to good lighting, good materials. We can see now that if I vary this color here, clicking on this bit here, then you can see the color change. And we can make it dark because we're going to make it into a fancy bit of expensive glass. And also down here, you can see that there are things like roughness. If we turn the roughness down, then it becomes a shiny surface. And again, this is actually getting pretty good as a representation of a phone, but we can do better. So the way that we would alter this more is, right now we've done everything so far in what's called object mode. And that's accessible through here. There's object mode, edit mode, sculpt mode, vertex mode, white mode, and texture paint. We're only going to talk about object mode and edit mode. If we go to edit mode, you can see that we, instead of having the entire the object being selectable atomically, we can deal with all of the smaller pieces of it. And there's the vertices, the points, and then the edges that connect them. And then there's the faces that bound the object. And so if we wanted to, for example, bevel all of these edges, then we can grab the edge select. There are hotkeys and keystrokes for these that it's very much worth learning. But you can grab all of these edges, holding up Shift, tumbling with the mouse button or with this guy to get around everything, and selecting all of those, and then you can bevel. It's this tool here where you can press Control B, and if you press this, then it turns into a tool, and you get beveling, and it looks garbage, but that's because we didn't apply the scale. So we can undo that, and we can jump back out of object edit mode into object mode. And if you go to object, apply, scale. So what we're remember before that, what we were saying is these should be on 45 degrees, but this object still thinks of itself as a cube, rather than the sort of iPhone obelisk shaped thing that we have it now. And so we can increase. So when you press that button, you get this bevel here. We can increase the number of segments to make it round, but because it's been scaled, that curve is going to look wrong. So we'll back out of that and go back into object mode, and you click object, apply, scale. No, not apply scale. It's clear scale, I think. No, no. It is apply scale. Yeah. Good. So object apply scale, or it's I press Control, not Command, but Control A, and then you get scale like that. And now, once we go into this object here, and if we were to bevel it, then it's going to look right. And those are 45 degrees. And so you have a bevel about that big for an iPhone, but it needs to have more segments. So by default, with one segment, then it's just chamfered. But you can increase the number of segments here. And it looks like that. But iPhones actually don't look like this. They have, it's not a circle on the corners. It's something called a continuous curve or a squircle. And you achieve that by changing this number here. So you can see if the higher this number, the sort of sharper it is. And the number for iPhone is, or for all Apple products, in fact, is 0.59 or thereabouts. And then you can change the size here. You can click and drag on this, and it'll vary the size of the bevel. You may see that it's being pretty crazy in terms of the scale. If you hold down Shift while you're dragging, then it's a much smaller sort of variation, so you can get that in to look right. It's also possible to put visual references into a page, into a scene, so that you can actually look at things like the Apple hardware guidelines in order to work these things out. But yeah, that's about right for this thing. Yeah, now if you press Tab to get out, or go back to object mode and deselect it, then you have a pretty good looking rectangle of glass. You can see that it's faceted here. And the way to fix that is to go to right click on it and click Shade Smooth, and then it looks like garbage. because it's moved all of the vertices, all of the edges. And the way to fix that is to go to this area here, the object data properties, normals, auto smooth. And I don't know why that isn't on by default in Blender, but it's somewhat annoying. So yeah, now that's actually a pretty good phone. If we wanted to add 2 materials to it, we could do some stuff. So if we go back into edit mode, or you can press tab to alternate between the 2 most recent modes that you were in. But bear in mind that if you're using sculpt mode because you're doing surface sculpting, then that's somewhere else as well. That's for sort of being able to actually pull and push the vertices with a pen, typically, in order to make those things look good. But yeah, so we can also bevel these edges. So instead of just clicking and shift clicking all of these, because it's pretty onerous to do that, you can hold down Alt or Option and click on an edge, and it will select all of the connected edges. So I can select this whole set of edges here, or this whole set of edges here. You could also select this face, but what we actually care about is these, right now, is these edge loops. So hold down Shift and Alt, and you can select both of those. And then we can bevel again. This bevel would be much smaller. And depending on which iPhone you're making it look like, you would change it. So if you're making an iPhone XS like mine, then you would make it a big bevel like that with lots of edges, and it looks like that. But that's kind of an old phone that nobody wants anymore. So if you want to do a more modern phone, then you would bevel it like this, and you'd have a much smaller bevel like that, and then increase the segments up until it looks right. And that's what a modern phone looks like. If you want to change the material so that that rim around the outside is a different material, again, we're talking about these different selection modes. If you select face, because you want to select all of the faces that you want, you can now select each of these faces. We don't need to be in extrude mode, and might be not helpful, so we can also just go back to move so that we're not endangering the topology, the sort of the shape of our thing. But you can also press Alt and click on things, and you can get an edge, a face loop. So if you click on a given sort of side of a thing, then you can select there and get all of the connected edges around it. Connected is, it's understood to be, if you make things out of 4-sided polygons, then the 2 adjacent sides, the 2 opposite sides, and if there's a consistent topological flow throughout everything, then you'll end up with the ability to do that. So people talk about having good edge flow or good topology or good topo within 3D modeling, and that's what good modeling lives or dies by. Is you can have this shape and it can be made out of any kind of set of points, but if they're well formed and structured like this, then you can kind of manipulate and navigate them easily. So now we have this band, but we want to expand it a little bit. You can go select more, less, select more. And it also says here that if you have a numpad, then command and then numpad plus allows you to do that. And we can go this selection until we get all the way out to here. Or actually, better yet, we could select this face and this face, and then we can invert the selection. So I think that is Control I. And yeah, if we are in, and so now we can add multiple materials to this. So you can add a new material slot here and click new. So you have to add a new slot, you have to add a new material to it, and then you have to assign those materials to the current selection. And now, I don't see the button for it, but if you hold down Z, so when we were back here in object mode, then you have these things. The buttons are no longer there when you're here, but you can change the visualization mode. by holding down Z, and you get wireframe solid material and rendered. And so you can be in material preview. So now we have the phone with a black surface and the white surface. And we can go into this and change the material like any other one. So if we really like the bubblegum purple color, then we can change this base color to that. We can also make it metallic. And we have a phone. If we wanted to go and change the back surface here as well, we can go into edit mode, make yet another material, assign it, and so that we have the ability to put in a purple surface like that, and change the roughness down, and that's more or less how a phone looks. So yeah, that's how you use. That's how you can kind of get an object from being just blocked out. But one of the things that hopefully is useful to bear in mind is that actually that rectangle got us quite a lot of the way in terms of being able to understand the heft and the shape of it. But that there are tremendous benefits to knowing more about all of these things. And you can also see that there are problems with the sort of the reflection on this. And those would be resolved by coming in here and adding an inset face, which is this guy here, and sort of tidying it up so that it has a little bit more confidence as to the shape of it, but it's sort of not without its problems. So those things can be kind of fixed with more attention. Also, this face here is a big, long n-gon, which is undesirable. 3D engines will like to make things out of triangles or quads. So if you were to connect these faces by grabbing that one there and that one there, and where's join? Connect vertex path J. You can tidy that up by selecting the ones at the top here. And you can see that the sort of the surface of this thing is you may be able to see on my screen the sort of the wobbly surface of that reflection is changing as I do this and becoming slightly tidier. Yeah. But it's very useful to just be able to block things. So that's you know a much higher level of detail. We could go in and do that for a person here, but it's really great to be able to kind of get objects to be the right size and scale, and then think about what they're like. We could also do things like I didn't share the rest of my screen, but I'll grab something like floor plan. And save that to my desktop.
Could you bring in a make human human?
I'm not familiar with make humans, but yeah, you can bring in all sorts of materials and models from places like Sketchfab or Turbo Squid or anywhere else that sells or gives those models out. Yes, Rhoda?
Yeah, this is wonderful. A couple of things. Number one, the texture on the phone, you can of course make a video or an image, right?
Yeah. So
I'm not saying to show that now, but the related question to that is just like Immersed and some different companies have view your Mac screen in VR. We could probably assign a surface in VR to be a screen. Can that be done through Blender? So it acts like a virtual screen?
Not a screen per se, but you can put a video texture on it. So Blender is still very much a tool for making pictures and movies. It's not a thing for building something to interact with per se.
Can it take the texture live, the video live?
No.
Okay.
No, it wouldn't be able to do that. Not that I'm aware of. You may be able to do it through some convolution of WebSockets and various pieces, but it's not really meant to be kind of a thing to facilitate real-time stuff
But
like that, other than for real-time previews.
let's say you built a room in Blender and you want to view that in an Oculus headset. Actually, you want another one of us to do that. What would you use? Would you put it in hubs, or what kind of a room would you make? What kind of a viewing platform?
So you can actually, I'm on my Mac here, but when I'm on my PC, there's as well as view, tool, and item, I actually have a VR tab. And so if I have my Quest plugged into my PC, then I can see this live as it's happening. So I've done a number of things where my daughter's been in VR and I've built a playground, and she can say, I want that ball to go there. I want that swing to come up here. No, it needs to be higher, make it shiny.
But for someone else,
so,
like let's say for Mark, how would you put it for Mark to view? Someone who's not in the room with you.
You could give them the blend file, so they can then open it up in their Blender and look at it as well. There's also a program. There's a plugin called Blender Mixer that facilitates multiplayer. I haven't played with it myself yet, but it is possible to use.
Well,
another couple of useful. Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering about how to basically publish it to VR.
So to publish something like this to VR, you can drop it in Sketchfab. So once you save a file like this, you can also export it. So now we have this phone and this person. We can do a little bit of work to this person just to make it so it looks like a person. Scale. So we'll get these. That looks like a good person. Very believable. And now we can go file, export as a GLTF, and say phone person. And now I can drop that in Sketchfab. Sketchfab.com is a really neat website where you can upload and share 3D models and things like that. So
yeah. So what happens if you build a room in Blender and you want to put a link on our websites for someone to visit that room? Can that be done easily? Is that what Fabian was talking about, going into to Spoke and then to Hubs, or is it another way, or what's the workflow for that?
None of these things are super easy yet. So it may, if you have a GLB model, then you can drop that into Hubs or Spoke. And I did that with that book, if you recall. Mm-hmm. I wrote that was not from Blender, but from a 3JS program that I wrote. And so if you're sort of connecting people via Hubs, then that phone person model that I just produced, I would be able to put there. Let's see, is this published yet?
Can I just say something quickly?
Sure.
There is also Blender is really powerful. Like you can do so much with it. It's still not a game engine compared to like Unity or Unreal or Godot, but right, because it's open source, you can extend it, and it's with Python module. It's relatively convenient. And then one thing that I've done a couple of years ago was publishing a GLB to a website and then wrapping that GLB in a 3GS scene and then making it explorable. So it's also something you could do. You can like write a plugin for Spoke, for example, or Hubs or any other VR program where you would, instead of just saving or exporting, you publish it to the web and then you wrap that scene in something else. So that also the level of customization that Blender allows, you can tie it to your pipeline or your other set of tools.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've got a bunch of things lying around that are basically just a model and a scene where I made a record player or a scary tree, and trying to play with normal mapping and bump mapping and things like that in order to be able to create something that allowed me to explore those capabilities. Another couple things that I enabled on this scene to make it look better while we were talking about it was enabling AO, ambient occlusion, and screen space reflections. And you can see that there are changes to the ground underneath it and to here. This actually takes it past what Blender can, what 3JS and what WebXR can facilitate. But it is really nice for getting a sense of things, and it is possible to achieve those things if you work on like specific techniques for reproducing them. But yeah, so like you can get a wax floor like that, and so you can see the reflection. You can see the reflection of the person in the phone and that kind of thing as well. So there are nice graphical effects. Those things can also be what's called baked, so that you can, if you think about like that Hello XR experience that Mozilla produced, that has a very well baked ambient occlusion, so that the internal nooks and crannies of the room are darker, in the same way that these internal shapes are. And it's really effective for helping remind people of the space.
So in terms of VR workflow then, so we still have the problem if, like I made a really simple room in Spoke, which was quite useful. But if I make a more detailed room here, then to give access to someone to visit that room is quite convoluted, right?
Yes.
And furthermore, if I do that, then if you have made an interactive demo in 3JS, then you can't just plop that in the room.
Nope. It's all absolutely sort of separated at this point.
We probably need to talk about how to make that possible, because obviously the commercial offerings will do that in an incredibly elegant way. I can imagine the Apple system will have all kinds of app stores for choosing the room, choosing the tools, but it would have to be in exactly the way they want it, for instance, Well,
I mean, Apple doesn't have any public offerings in related to virtual reality.
Not yet.
And I would say that no current offerings by anybody are any good. They're all incredibly frustrating and require an enthusiast and a real sort of hobbyist mindset in order to be able to navigate without tearing your hair out. So I wouldn't be optimistic that a single company is able to wave a wand and make this a seamless experience. It's still really hard, and that's.
I believe you, and I believe you partly because you have much deeper experience. But one thing that we all know from Apple's history is that they're very good with the whole, let's call it user experience, onboarding, polish, all of that stuff. So whatever they will be offering in the beginning, it'll be limited, but this will have to come into it. But anyway, that's a little bit by the by, but we do agree that at least as a general point, we need to figure out a way to make these things work together, right? Because we can't afford to have VR just get wasted on single experience rooms, right?
Right. And I think the big question is what are the practical steps and for whom is it appropriate those steps be taken? I personally believe that the web is a really important platform, and that kind of does mean that the way that these things be resolved would be best to be done through and by web and web technologies. But I don't know that that people have a clear perspective of all of the requirements to make that happen. But yeah, so you can see this is a person. It's not a good person, but it's a person. And that was done through, I think I didn't show extrusion, but extrusion is another thing that is, once you can extrude and you can bevel, you can build just about everything in 3D pretty easily. Extruding is, where you get an object like a cube.
So, Randall, if I was given a large budget, what I would spend money on is to start industry dialogue and start experimenting with exactly this type of issue of integrating different tools in different rooms and different data types. Is that what you would also do?
I think so. The one thing is that I'm less sure that that we have a good sense of what anyone's there for. Like the kind of the interoperability needs to be married to a good enough story of what anybody is doing in their own, in the first place on their own. So people need to be able to work together, but people also need to be able to work. And I don't know that that's necessarily completely done and dusted at this point. And that's kind of why I've been looking at word processing and data visualizations and some of the more basic kind of input-based innovations that would provide a rationale for being in and staying in VR.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why I want to do, at least conceptually, author for VR, just to narrow the focus down. But I mean, we do expect that in, let's say, 15 years, it will be very normal for people to have a VR or AR headsets, and they will be integrated.
Maybe if we work out what's useful about it.
Yeah, but I mean, it definitely games. That's that's going to be a huge driver. Definitely social. There's just there's so much money being spent, and the potential is quite clear. That's fine. So people are going to have these headsets. How we actually make them work useful. Right now it's not really feasible to even work on it, is it?
Nope. Sorry.
Marcus, you have your yellow hand up.
Yes, I do. I was just thinking this chimes with discussion with Dave Miller this morning, our little lab group, about, something similar to, one of his students is looking at transferring objects between games. And there's an interesting sort of split between what the players of games want to do and what the designers of games want to do, and which on the face of it doesn't seem to make sense. But I guess from the design perspective, you're trying to cut down on the degree of ambiguity and the amount of complexity you've got to deal with. And the players just want to take their cool stuff and do what they want to do where they want to do it. And that sort of it seems to echo what Freud was just alluding to, into ease of moving stuff around.
Yeah.
And also, I presume we're going to do data plans for these new phones next week, because now I know that my phone is insufficiently shiny, and I'm seeing the new ones emerge before my eyes.
Oh, yeah. These are just the default sort of curvatures and sizes. There's a really good document that Apple publishes that has the exact curvature of all of these things in order to be able to make sure that people can build cases that fit on them and stuff. So this is not based on anything unrelated to anything. It's just my recollection of having to produce these phones over and over and over and over again for various proofs of concept.
The reason I have both reader and author is author initially had a read mode. But then it became quite clear that people wouldn't use the same software, and reading and writing are very different things, even though very often done, interchangeably, I mean, at the same time. We probably need to focus on that in VR too. There's the production of things, and then there's the use of things, because another really interesting part will be, sorry, I just got a notification that was disruptive. If these displays can be read in the room, then you can have anything from visual meta to QR code. And that means you have transfer of whatever was on that screen into the room. These are really deep and important issues. It seems like we don't even have environments to test it in yet, right?
Yeah. No, it's exciting, but it does mean that all of the desire paths that would typically be paved over in a more well-trodden space are yet to be discovered and kind of helped. You can make some really cool future phones. Yeah, so I don't know if that's, hopefully that was useful. I mean, this is recorded, so you can go back over it if I went too quickly. But yeah, you can see how you can go from very basic shapes and manipulations into being able to define and declare a scene that you have enough control over to be able to understand things like the human ergonomics of it. I actually don't know if this is too tall or too short. The surface and I definitely didn't obey any rules when I built this arm to figure out how comfortable it is, but it helps to sort of contextualize what information actually might be if you were to have, I don't know, virtual devices or a virtual document store here kind of thing.
I think
Yeah,
we're
is there anything?
now I'm just thinking about where we are in history. This is basically CD-ROM stage. There is no internet for VR yet properly.
Yeah, and people, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it is, but it could be a speaker. It could be a chili bin. What do people call it? A cold box, whatever that is. Could be somebody for organ donation.
Yes.
Like caution from my heart.
So a question then on this really simple thing, which, when I tried to explain the whole opportunities, one of the things I want to talk about is the defined glossary terms room, the graph room. We have it all around, like we talked earlier. But the way things are now, to have a piece of software that reads from a .liquid file, a layout or whatever, like you have done with the Constellation thing already, Brandel, and then goes into a VR room and assigns it space on a wall and allows the user in that VR space to move it or touch it. It's basically impossible, right? Or do we have to go into our JavaScript room and add the house to that, so to speak?
Yeah, so adding objects to, like, adding on once you've created a scene like this, you just load it within the file, but then there's nothing about the scene that the system knows per se. There's no way at this point to be able to kind of layer in interactivity. I mean, one thing you can do is, you saw that I named the person and the phone. What you could do is apply some kind of naming scheme to objects within your scene, so that you can say everything called person is actually non-interactable and you don't pick it up, but everything that is labeled phone can be. So if you've put 10 phones in there, then you can pick them all up and move them around. But that doesn't necessarily, but you would need to program that. There's very little you get for free in this world. in this particular space of modeling and navigation and things like that, because it's really just and it's in the infancy of the people even literally building the frameworks and infrastructure for facilitating it are still working those pieces on. But it's nevertheless very important and valuable for people who have other questions and concerns like text to be able to kind of poke their head in and see what kinds of inquiries and demands they can make of the system in order to make sure that it does useful stuff.
Because this makes me think back to the last meetup we had, and when Fabian first mentioned the GLTF, and I may have misunderstood whether GLTF or GLTF with some extra plugins effectively gives you a sort of portmanteau object, and this idea that, well, okay, well then can we then have a sort of probably a sentient object, knows what it is, it knows its weight, it knows its calorie value, it knows whether it can stick to a wall or not. The reason I mention that is it sort of seems to turn things around. I know I sort of mentioned it earlier, but in other words, instead of taking something in a sense more like a document, as we might start with today, and say, I want to take my document, I want to put it into this thing, is that we take a thing, whether it is indeed a whole document, or just individual words, for sake, for example, in that, as effectively environmentally aware, intelligence is the wrong word, but environmentally aware bits of data. So that when you put them into the room, they've got a better chance of interacting sensibly. And I say room in the loosest sense of the word, but in your virtual environment, they have a sort of sensible way of interacting with the host environment.
So I'm not familiar with the additional information, how people encode additional information beyond the rendering information into GLTF. GLTF was originally devised way back, sort of, I don't know, when did Tony make it? Like 14, 15? But GLTF 1 was still in its infancy by the time we were talking about it in 16. It's supposed to be, so the vision then was that it was the JPEG of 3D. And as such, JPEG does have EXIF information, but it's primarily a last mile format. You wouldn't, as a serious photographer, be working with and manipulating and saving JPEGs in order to be able to do most information. For one thing, the color space isn't great. It uses discrete cosine transforms that mash fine details. Sometimes the bit depth is wrong. All those kinds of reasons. And it's not layered. JPEG is not layered. So at some point in the past, that was what GLTF was supposed to be, with all of the sort of the consequences that flow from that. And so what you found is that people have prioritized compression sometimes at the cost of fidelity. So there's a form of compression called Draco, which is very good at, because 3D files can quickly get out of hand in terms of their size. Every single point needs to be defined in three-dimensional space at a very, very high fidelity. And then once you add physically based rendered materials, then you have a roughness and a metalness and an albedo, that's the color, and then an emissive map. And those can be any number of resolutions, and that depends on something that I didn't show at all called your UV mapping and coverage. So they end up enormous. And so for transmission, as GLTF was originally devised for, the GL transmission format, they want to make them as small as possible, and to hell with various aspects of its editability or interoperability or fidelity of that information. What I'm less familiar with, and I suspect that there has been work on it, is encoding that additional information back into GLTF so that you have uncompressed formats. You have potentially layers or mappings and maskings and things like that. So if you have a human body and you want to know where are the hands, then you can have the selection boundaries that aren't specifically for the benefit of any kind of visual representation within a tool, but so simply somebody knows what it is. I know that's the vision for the Universal Scene Description format, USD, and of which USDZ, the AR quick look file format that you see on phones. I also have an iPhone XS, so I was joking about it. I'm sorry if it sounded like I was being too mean. USD is for that because it was devised by Pixar for working on shows, and so that there's this myriad sort of channels of information, only some of which may be relevant in any given sort of package, but it's an interoperation format first and foremost. And so I was only kind of joking when I said, how about USD? Because the vision, if not the reality right now, is for it to do that job. And I can imagine that there will be a similar mission being pushed forward for GLTF, but I wonder which is the better angle to start from something that started its life as a transmission format versus something that is sort of an interoperability format.
So we have to, well, at least I have to leave quite soon, but let's say that I get funding to do author VR, very unlikely, but for the sake of argument, and I decide that I'm not going to go the web route because of these issues. If I code it for Oculus with all the native Android stuff and whatever, and then there is another platform, of course there are many, how much recoding must be done? Is it the similar thing to Mac and Windows, or are these platforms much more similar for their native apps?
It depends. In practice, you'd probably use Unity or Unreal, but in practice, most likely Unity 3D. In which case, that has compile targets for everybody. You can build for PlayStation, you can build for Nintendo, whatever they use now, Switch, I guess. And they sort of take care of that. You may have to pay more money for the thing that allows you to do that. But yeah, in theory, Unity takes care of all of those things. That said, you get a lot less out of Unity than you would hope in terms of its capacity to manage 3D stuff. Valve through Steam VR has done quite a lot of work to make it slightly less painful, and people like Ultra Leap, the people who make the Leap Motion and the Ultra Haptics device for hand tracking, have lent a hand. But again, it is a remarkably hard slog to get things working in VR. What you do get is a guarantee of a much higher sort of fidelity environment and more direct access to all of the sort of the computational capabilities of the device, but you're locked to that device and that runtime and all of the things that sort of come from that. So yeah, you would use Unity. You may, I don't know that Google doesn't have a VR system out there at the moment. Nobody has a VR system that they build tools for. So even Oculus, it's mostly understood to be for games, and so they expect you to use game engines.
Such as Unity, exactly. All right, well, that was great Blender demo, lots to think about, and yeah, it's really interesting to see where the actual real issues are rather than what we thought about before. I look forward to seeing you guys on Friday, where yeah, things may be different or not, but anyway, any other final things for today?
Yeah, wishing you to have fun on Wednesday, actually, not just doing it, but actually enjoying it.
I'll do my best, and I'll report.
Yeah, best of luck on Wednesday.
Okay, thanks everyone. See you Friday. Bye.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.